Hello everybody, Marcus Godwin here with the Noise of Time Shoom Vremeny blog, speaking to you this time from the heart of Dostoevsky land in the very centre of St. Petersburg, Russia, on the very same streets where he had so many of his characters play out and come to the end of their lives. So much has happened actually since I made the last blog, this is the first one this year, believe it or not, so I waited until after April Fool's Day. Anyway. So much has happened, it's impossible to keep up. I'm going to try and do what I can. I want to talk about the rather ominous atmosphere here in Russia as people are more and more expecting all kinds of problems from all sorts of directions. Let me just recap that not long ago, the victor of the US electoral fraud, Joseph Biden, publicly agreed, he said, I do, to the proposition that Russian President Vladimir Putin is a killer. And when the journalist then asked what price is he going to have to pay, he said he's going to see very soon. So in order to bring all this together, I want to go back to a few anniversaries that we have had recently. The anniversary of the Western-backed putsch in Ukraine, which brought to power in the city of Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, the mother of Russian cities, in fact, where Kiev Rus started over 1,000 years ago. Absolutely anti-Russian, Russia-hating, Christianity-hating people to power, who have been attempting to poison Ukraine ever since. Contacts I have on the ground who are in touch with people there say that among the adult population, actually, this is kind of failing. That there is a higher percentage now who regret the split with Russia, even those who were seduced back in the day now realise it's a mistake. But we have to also factor in that the education system and those coming out of Ukrainian schools have been bombarded by absolutely racist, Russophobe propaganda and distortions of world history and so on since 2014. So that is really a crime against humanity. There's not many other words to put it. That putsch led directly to the reunification of Crimea, which was signed into legality by the Russian Parliament and Russian President on the 18th of March 2014. The Western elites truly hate this. It's their biggest single defeat in the whole shaboodle. But I've spoken about this already. What we are seeing now in eastern Ukraine and Donbass is a massive build-up of Ukrainian troops. In the past years, they have had training from American and British specialists above all, but also other NATO countries, and loads of money, lots of backing, etc., etc., etc. There have been more and more attacks and shellings into the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, which set themselves up to get away from this Russia-hating, Christianity-hating, Russian history-hating junta that the West had installed in Kiev. We've also had the anniversary of what's known as the Skripal affair, which was set loose on the world in Great Britain about a week and a half before the last Russian presidential election. It was also on the 18th of March, time to coincide with the anniversary already of the reunification of Crimea with Russia. The Skripal affair brought to public consciousness, or should I say unconsciousness in many ways, a new word, Novichok, which to all accounts is an extremely lethal form of nerve gas, a chemical weapon created in the Soviet Union in the late 80s, as I understand. If anyone touches it or gets near it, gets a whiff of it, you die immediately, and so on and so forth. And, you know, we all remember the story that the Skripals were found rolling around on the floor, coughing and spluttering by a passerby who just happened to be the main nurse of the Ministry of Defence, etc., etc. And all this happened to happen about 9 miles away from Porton Down, which is one of the biggest collections and laboratories researching chemical weapons and germ warfare and all sorts of other nice things that you just love your kids to know all about in Porton Down, just outside the city of Salisbury. The word Novichok entered our consciousness. There was the Western media narrative and Western government narrative is, of course, that Russia performed this heinous crime of assassinating an ex-spy on British soil, etc., 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 etc. There was a big wave of incredulity throughout the so-called alt media, in other words, people who are writing and blogging stuff, as I'm doing to you now, outside of the mainstream, above all, Western media, when at a major conference, I forget, I might well have been in this city actually, Vladimir Putin asked about this, explained, he said, do you think the British Secret Service poisoned Sergei Skripal and his daughter? Vladimir Putin answered something like this. He said, you know, if the British Secret Service had wanted to do that, they have him in their sights. He's living there in Salisbury under their surveillance, obviously. If they wanted to kill him, they could have done so at any time, in any way, and made it look like anything. He said, I think they probably didn't. And he went on to say, being pressed a little bit further, it seems to me somebody just wanted to create a very big scandal. So a lot of people were rather upset about this because they believed that the Skripals were poisoned by Novichok, and if the Russians didn't do it, then obviously the British Secret Service did it. Well, I propose another possibility. Can somebody please show me one jot of actual evidence that anybody was poisoned at all on that day? Because all we have to go on is the say-so of the British government and the British media. Now, I'm very sorry, but that say-so is not worth the air it's born on, let alone any paper it might be printed on. That's a very sad state of affairs for a British citizen to face up to, as I'm a British citizen, but and many of my compatriots living there can't face up to that. I remember the sinking feeling and the kind of pit in my stomach as I watched the next day a debate in the House of Commons, and every MP stood up there, totally across party lines, and basically lied themselves blue in the face with a predetermined script that they'd all been given. This is a very, very sad state of affairs. So the word Novichok was born onto the public consciousness, especially in Great Britain, but all around the Western world, and of course here in Russia too. So it was not really a surprise, but I have to admit it was a surprise, because I still always get surprised when their behaviour is just so blatant, so lacking in imagination even or anything. But then they brought up the Novichok again after Alexei Navalny, who apparently became ill somehow on a flight from Siberia to Moscow. The plane made an emergency landing, inconveniencing all the other passengers hugely, and he was taken to hospital where doctors found basically nothing very much wrong with him. However, he wanted to go to Germany. His family were asking for him to be allowed to go to Germany. Germany said, yes, we'll take him. Then after a few weeks, they said, we've now found he was poisoned with, wait for it, drum roll, British Novichok. Therefore, they started calling for more sanctions against Russia, etc., etc., etc. And the whole propaganda thing of Novichok just keeps on going. It just keeps on giving. It's like, that's the way propaganda works. Just constant, mind-numbing repetition of some very basic facts that, if you check into it, obviously just can't be true. It's just impossible. So, The motives for this are what, basically? The motives for the Skripal affair in the first place was to try to affect the presidential election here in the Russian Federation. It had exactly the opposite effect. It gave Vladimir Putin the biggest majority he's ever got. Also I don't remember if it was exactly before or just after, but it was around the time when Putin and Trump had their first and, as sadly, one and only meeting during Trump's tenure as presidency. It was clearly to scupper any possibility of a rapprochement between the United States and Russia, as the rest of the world's ruling elites didn't want that to happen. And of course the deep state in the United States certainly didn't want that to happen. Such a thing would of course be superb for world peace and so on and so forth, but unfortunately one has to accept the fact that Western leaders are in no way interested. World peace is not on their agenda, absolutely not on their agenda at all. They want the exact opposite. Plus, together with the rehashing of the Novichok blah blah, right now, they are desperate to try and sabotage the very nearly completed Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline direct from Russia to Germany, bypassing Baltic states and Poland and countries which may, want to kind of interfere in this and suddenly interrupt the flow of the gas or something like this. So these are the main motives for these acts, as far as I can see. But also we're looking now at a rather dangerous situation, and this whole Novichok nonsense and Navalny nonsense is going to be used to justify whatever moves are taken further against Russia now. We are looking at a very serious escalation of tensions in the east of Ukraine and in the Donbass independent republics who proclaim themselves independent to get away from the same Russia-hating, Christianity-hating junta that the West installed there in Kiev, the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics. There has been a massive gathering of new Ukrainian military forces, of course newly trained by America and Great Britain and other NATO suspects, but primarily America and Great Britain. Newly furbished with lots of cash from Western taxpayers and so on and so forth. They want to get back what they see as their territory, and they want this to be a kind of punishment for Russia as such. I think we are probably looking at what's going to be a consolidated attack, maybe a massive attack in Syria or a greater attack in Syria. Rekindling of the war in Donbass, a massive attack on Donbass, to which Russia would probably have to respond, although they seem to be pretty damn competent and prepared, the defense forces of those two republics. But there has been an equal and opposite massing of Russian forces on the border. So they are prepared. The news here is putting this on 4th or 5th place in the headlines. No panic, no anything like this. But that will probably be coordinated with a rehashing of the pro-Navalny protests. The organisers of the protests said we're going to stop protesting now from the last one about 6 weeks ago, which was the second one was actually far less attended than the first, so obviously it didn't have that much support anyway. Navalny, I'm rather surprised they even managed to inflate the deflated balloon. I thought it was deflated and stagnant beyond reuse, but they have managed to reflate it, and Navalny has rekindled in the kind of 5% of people who are vaguely interested in him, with again complete nonsense lies. And the whole story about this Putin's palace on the south coast there, which is actually owned by somebody else and isn't even finished, is just utter nonsense. It's not utter nonsense that Navalny has some very expensive properties around Europe, in Germany and in the French Alps. I've seen the deeds published online to a villa he has for more than €3 million. Not a bad place at all. So we're looking at a more